setting up your palette in a certain order will make finding your colors and mixing your colors really easy. So the first color you want to put out is white, and I usually put out about enough, about the size of a quarter or a 50-cent piece. So there's my white down there. And then near the white, I'm going to put some yellow, but try not to let it touch. Put a good amount of yellow on your palette. So there's my yellow. And you can always add more. So leave a pretty big space in between the yellow. And now we're going to make a spot of red. Like I said, my paint is really thick. So if yours is thinner, just feel free to add more. So these are the warm colors, the yellows and the reds, and we're going to make our orange. And the white is more of a neutral color. On the other side of the palette, I'm going to put some blue. We don't really need a lot of blue because there's not a lot of green, or there's really no green in this painting. But I'm going to put a little bit of blue to make some purple. So maybe a little bit of blue. And then give yourself some room to put some black on. And the black we're going to make pretty thin. So even if you have really thick paint like me, just put some black there and know that we're going to stir in some water. So hopefully you have your palette set up on the darker colors on one side and the lighter colors on the other side. So get a good look at this image, and let's talk about the painting for a couple minutes. There is a large sunset in the background, and we're going to work on the background first because hopefully you may know this. If you don't, I'll just share it with you that we work on the background first. We start in the center, and then we'll let the paint dry while we're painting the edges. And then we'll be able to work on more brush strokes and the main image of the painting after that, the tree and the birds and the grass and so on. So when you are painting, you never want to put anything right in the middle. So when you start working on the sunset, find a place that's off center. And you can also go off center to the side or up and down. So find a place that's a little off center, and then we're going to start with white, and we're going to slowly mix in a little bit of yellow, and then we're going to mix on our palette a little bit of gold. When you put a little bit of orange into the gold, it'll get darker and darker, and eventually we'll have red on the edges. And this mixing, you're going to need some water. So hopefully you have a large brush and you could be doing a lot of mixing. The water is going to really help with all the blending. What you want to avoid is having it look like a target of 3 colors. And the way to do that is to simply use your brush and make a lot of round, large brush strokes. So use your whole arm when you're painting. And then once you are really happy with the background, we're going to let it dry for a minute. So what are we going to do while we're waiting for it to dry? We paint the edges. So you can see I've painted the edges. So I'm going to move this out of the way. Hopefully you've got a pretty good idea. I'll bring it back when I start talking about how to design your tree. So let's get started. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my brush. I'm going to put some water on it. And you might not be able to see the white, but I'm starting with white and water. And I'm going to paint off to the side a little bit a circle with the white and the water. I know you probably can't see that. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the yellow and I'm going to mix it up on my palette And then with the white and a little bit of yellow, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to start getting, you can very barely see a little bit of a yellow circle. And you can add in a little bit of white to that yellow circle with water and blend it around and around. And then I'm going to add in a little bit more yellow. And I did not wash my brush yet. I'm going in curvy motions around and around. And now what you see is that sun is really starting to radiate. And the one thing you want to do is go back and very lightly, it's like a feather touch, really lightly go back where the edges are to where you painted that white and see if you can blend all that together. And then once you have it blended, just take your brush and get the yellow darker and darker. And then go back and blend the edges again. Then you can take some yellow and put it on your palette and a little bit of red and mix it in. And you get the secondary color of orange. Now you want a real pale orange at first. So almost like a gold color. And while that yellow is still wet, blend in some of that gold. Now, if you're having trouble blending the edges, dip your brush in the water, and that will help you blend. That is the trick with acrylic paints, is that you really need to work with water to get the edges blending. So you're going to go over this sun 2 or 3 times. And now I'm getting more of the gold in. And the way I'm getting the gold is I'm just mixing it right on my palette. The brush is full of paint. And I'm just going right into the wet paint that I already have. Go around and around. And then you have to kind of look at it and see, where do I need to add blending? You want to blend it, brush, put some water on your brush. If you paint thin and wet, you will get some really nice blending going on. And then it's a matter of getting a little bit darker and a little bit darker. So now I'm going to take some yellow, I'm going to mix it on my palette, and I'm going to take some red, and I'm getting more of a dark orange color. So yellow and red, and get it as darker and darker. And you also can do a lot of mixing right on your painting. So once you have it blocked in, I'm washing my brush. And now I'm doing the blending with a clean brush and water. So really go through, use water to do your blending. It's a very light touch. Now, if you're noticing that your yellow is starting to go away because you have too much orange, I have yellow on my brush. And I'm mixing some yellow. I'm mixing plain yellow right back into where I started with the gold. And play around with your colors. And add water, rinse your brush. Put some more just plain yellow back here. and make the colors a little more dramatic, a little darker, maybe even more white here. For me, acrylic painting is all about layers. See how I added more white? And now I'm just smoothing it all the way out to the edge. Very light touch. And it should be nice and smooth. And then it's a matter of getting a little bit darker and a little bit darker. So how do you get it darker? You take some of that red and I'm mixing it into the gold. And I'm making a dark orange. Don't go too dark too soon. Now I have that beautiful deep orange color. And then take a few minutes and do your blending. And what you're going to end up doing is go all the way to the edge of your canvas, making these round brush strokes. And again, if it's not smooth enough or you want it to look a little more blended, it's a real light touch with your paintbrush. And add water. And you can just re-blend. Go all the way around. And I'm actually using a pretty good amount of water on my canvas. I'm not using so much that it's drippy. If your canvas becomes real wet because you're dripping too much, you can always use a paper towel and you can blot it like that. And the great thing about acrylic is you can paint right over it. So if you get a little drips on your canvas, don't worry. Just enjoy the act of painting. Now you can see I'm getting darker. So now I'm just blending plain red right into this canvas. And you could add more yellow, make it streaky, blend. It's really up to you how you want your sunset to look. Just going around and around. Give it time to dry. And I'm adding some red. Each time you go, you want a little bit darker. And you want it a little bit darker and a little bit darker. So now I'm using the red and the water. And I'm just making these round, curvy brush strokes. Use your arm when you're painting. Go around and around. And eventually you're going to fill up all the white. So I'm blending together the yellow and the red to make orange. And I'm making the orange darker and darker. And I'm adding some water to do the blending. If you see brush strokes and you want those to go away, just make your paint a little bit thicker. Now at some point you're going to want a really, really dark color. You want more of a darkish purple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pretty good amount of that red and a little dot of the blue, and a lot of red, and you make sort of a magenta color. So more red and a teeny tiny bit of blue. And you get a reddish purple. And if it's too thick, add a little water. Save the darkest color for the very edges. And I am blending that darkish color right into the orange and the red, so it's not a target. So that's why I'm using water, and I'm using my arm to do the blending. And I'm just going back and forth. I'm using a real light touch with my paint. I'm barely touching the canvas because I don't want to leave a lot of brush strokes. I want it to look smooth. So I'm using water. It's almost like petting a kitty. Just go round and around and really keep making it nice and smooth. Now, when you start making your purple, if it gets a little too dark, how do you fix it? You add a little red to it, and you can immediately change it. That's the beauty of painting with acrylics, is you can change it. So I'm just going to go right up to the edge and get my corners. Kind of like the way that's looking. And I'm just going to paint. I don't want the edges too dark because you want to be able to see the silhouette of the tree and the grass and the little bird or whatever else you want to paint. So I'm just going to keep working on these brush strokes. If you want it a teeny bit darker, you can, but keep in mind, you want to be able to see a little bit of that reddish color, so it's not too purpley, maybe a little bit on the end, a little bit on the end. Just blend it out. Don't worry if it's a little dark. You know how to fix it if it's a little dark? You add in a little more red, let it dry for a couple seconds, and then add in a little more red, and it will get less dark. You will lighten up the value of your painting. You really don't want it too dark, just to give a hint of darkness, but not too dark. That's about as dark as I want it to get. So I'm adding some red over here, and a little bit of that purple, and a little bit of the water. Just go around and around and have fun. That's what it's all about, is just enjoying what you're doing. No one's going to judge you. No one's going to look at it and say your colors are too dark. Just have fun. See what works for you. If you need to add a little more red in certain spots, add a little more red. If you need to add a little water because it's too thick, then add a little water. Sometimes we have to stop what we're doing and look at it and think about it. And to be honest, the thinking about painting was always the hardest part for me, because I love painting so much that I don't always stop and think about it. But if you do, if you stop and look at it and think, well, this part's a little dark. Do I want to add some red to it? Or this part looks a little streaky. Do I want to put a little more paint there? As you paint, figure out what looks good to you, because you are the one that's going to be looking at your painting. And hopefully, with practice, you can paint more and more, because I can tell you that homemade paintings like this that you've done, that's one of a kind, they make really great presents. Just about everyone in my family and quite a few of my friends have paintings that I've done. It's because I like to do it. Just gives me a lot of pleasure. I just love to do this. Put on some music and just enjoy yourself, because no one's going to judge you. Now what I'm doing now is I'm rinsing my brush really, really well. And I'm going to wipe it on the paper towel or napkin if you have one. And now I'm just going to step and look at it a little bit. And I think I'd like to add a little tiny bit of white right in the middle. So I'm making it a little bit brighter. So that's that brain-body connection I was talking about. Think about what you're doing. And now you can make these changes. So what am I doing now? I'm going to brighten up the yellow. So I'm going to put some yellow on my palette and a little white. And I'm going to stir it up. Maybe a little more white. And I'm just going and fixing and adding some brightness. I feel like I want the bright part of the sunset to be a little bit bigger. So you take a minute and look at what you've done so far and see if you need to make some adjustments. And I'm adding water. See how I made the bright spot bigger? Now I'm going to add some gold. So that's what I'm saying about go back and make any changes you want. So I'm mixing together some yellow and some red. So I feel like I want some more gold in here. Got a little dark on me. And rinse your brush and play around with your colors. I'm just adding water now to give it that final touch. Around and around. You can do this. Just takes a little bit of practice. There. I think I'm happy with that. I hope you're happy with what you have so far. So now we want to let our canvas dry. So I washed my brush. I tapped it on my paper towel. So now I have a pretty clean brush. So I'm going to move this up just a little bit. There we go. And what I'm going to do now is while my sunset is drying, I want to paint the edges. So I'm going to tilt it in a little bit so you can see the edges and just paint the tops and the sides with the same colors that you used before. So on the edges, you can put the dark color at the corners. So I'm just getting the edges. So go ahead and let your painting dry. And while you're letting that dry, go ahead and paint the edges. And the reason you paint the edges is that way you don't have all that white. And that way you can just hang it up as is. You don't even have to frame it. A lot of people just hang up their art the way it is, and you don't have to buy a frame for it. Frames are nice, but they're very expensive. And also, if you're going to give your painting to someone as a gift, they might have a certain idea for a type of frame that they want to use. So I'm just painting the edges, and you want to get all the sides. So paint the sides, paint the top, and paint the bottom. I've painted this edge, so I'm just going to turn it so you can see it. So see how I painted that edge? I'm going to paint the bottom now. So this is, I'm tilting it in so you can see it. And this is actually the bottom of the canvas. So give yourself a few minutes to paint the whole edge. If you need more paint, now would also be a good time to put it on your palette. You don't really need a whole lot though, because once we are finished painting the edges, most of what we're going to be doing is with black, because we're going to be painting the rest of this picture in the silhouette. So now I have the bottom painted. So there it is again. And I need to finish painting the top. I'm using the largest brush I have to paint the edges. And I'm actually using all the colors from the sunset that I already have. So I'm not really doing a whole lot of color mixing, in case you're wondering, well, what color do I paint the edge? I'm just using the colors that I already have. So now I need to paint this edge too. Takes a few minutes to paint the edges, but that's actually a good thing because we want our background to be pretty dry. So there you have it. So I'm going to give you a minute or two to catch up to me. I'm washing my brush. The other thing you need to know about acrylic paints is that it dries solid. So if you don't wash your brush good and you let your brush dry, it's going to be like a rock. And it's very hard to get that dried paint out and make your brush workable again. But I do know a trick to that. And that is, if your brushes are dry and you're having trouble, you might try Murphy's Wood soap, because that sometimes will help, but it takes a really long time. You have to soak it. So the best way to avoid that is take really good care of your brushes. So wash your brush really, really, really good. and then wipe it clean on a napkin and do that 3 or 4 times. And when you're done with a brush and you can't get to a sink right away, I actually leave my brush in my water. So this is my water right here. I'm going to leave it in there. And then later when the class is over, I will take my brushes to the sink and I will wash them really, really carefully with warm water. And the other thing about brush care that you need to know is if you lay your brushes flat, say you have an old towel, this is just an old kitchen towel. This is what I do when I wash my brushes. After I use soap and water, I take my brushes that are nice and clean and I lay them flat. Let your brushes dry flat, because if you let them dry like this, there will be small pieces of paint that you didn't get, and it will dry, and it will cause your brush to be less usable. So just a little tip, when you're finished, put your brush like that on a towel, let it sit overnight, and they'll be perfect in the morning, ready to go paint some more beautiful art. So I'm going to show you the tree again, so you can get an idea of the shapes for the tree. So let's take a look at this tree for a minute. The tree is going to start again off center somewhere. So think about where you want to put your tree. Do you want it more to the right or do you want it more to the left? That's really up to you. So I'm going to make the tree a little to the left, and I'm going to paint thicker brush strokes at the bottom. And as I move up, I'm going to use thinner and thinner brush strokes, and eventually I will change brushes and use the detail brush. Now, when you are painting these fine details, do it slowly and carefully so you can get an idea of where you want your details. You don't want too many details, but you want enough so that it looks super beautiful. So again, I've started with some larger brush strokes at the bottom, and as the tree grows, it gets thinner and thinner. And then after your tree is done, we can add in the rest of the details, a little crane perhaps, or an owl, and some tall grasses. And if you want to put other little shapes in the background, you can. And you'll work the whole canvas until you're happy with your picture. So take your time with this. And again, you don't have to follow every single shape and every single line as I do it. Be creative. If you want your tree more curly, more fantasy, make it more curly and more fantasy looking. If you want your lines straighter, then make your lines straighter. Just have fun. Okay, so hopefully your edges are painted, and hopefully most of the beautiful sunset is painted. And I'm going to now start with the larger of the two pointy brushes, and I'm going to put some water on my brush, and I really want to add water and black. And you don't want your black too thick. So stir up a little bit of black. And if you want to add a touch of blue in to make it a little less stark, I don't usually use black right out of the tube. I usually mix my own. And the way to make your own black is to mix orange with a little bit of brown. And then once you have brown, you mix the brown with the blue and you make sort of a less intense black. It's a little stark. So I'll show you how to make brown if you want to try that. So how do you make brown? You take some yellow You take some red and you get some orange. Then you take some blue. I need a little more red, so let me put a little more red on my plate. There we go. So I have some red and some blue and some yellow. And now I'm getting a brown color. So play around with your brown. You want it real earthy looking, then add a little more orange to it, or add a little more yellow. Once you have a deep brown, you can add a little bit of blue and a little bit of red, and eventually you'll get a color that's super dark, and it's not exactly black, but it's a grayish, earthy black. So you can try mixing that, and I'm just going to put some black right in there. So play around with your colors. Now I have a lot of paint on my brush, so I'm going to rinse it off because you don't want to paint with a glob. So stir it up, get some water on your brush, and we're going to start working on the tree. And when you start the tree, what you want to do is start with the thick part first, the tree trunk, and let's see how we do. So make some brush strokes and then fill them in. It should be about the thickness of maybe 2 fingers to start with. And then you can work yourself, maybe go out to one side. And this is where the real sort of relaxing, just pleasure painting comes in. Take your time with your tree. Now I added a little bit of water. Sort of like the letter Y. And again, as you are moving closer and closer to the edge, you want to lift up on your brush, and you don't want to press quite so hard because you want your brush strokes thinner and thinner. So if you press less, and then you're just using the tip of your brush, you get some thinner lines. And now I've got how beautiful it is already, and I only have one branch. What I suggest you do is paint a few branches. You can always add more later, but you can't take them away very easily. So paint a few branches. And don't be afraid, go up right through your sunset. Take your time. If you run out of paint, put a little bit more. And I am just adding some thin branches too. As you're painting the branches way out to the edges, you can switch brushes. And now I could use my smaller brush. And I actually do use my pinky. And I'm balancing my pinky on the canvas. And this will help me get some of these details. Real light touch. Just figure out where you want your brush strokes to go. Not too much. If you want some of those real thin branches like what I'm doing, I'm barely touching the canvas at this point. And take your time. And like I said, stop every once in a while and look at your canvas and see what you have. Like I said, we're adding thick branches first, and then the thin branches. Go right through your beautiful sunset. I'm starting with the thicker branches by pressing down, and I'm just seeing what I want to do. What makes sense for the tree. So I have the thick branches first and the thin branches. And use up your whole space. It's your tree. You decide how many branches it has. If you need to add a little water so that you can start doing some of these thinner brush strokes, add some water. But constantly look at where you're at. And think, where do I need more branches? What would make this picture and this tree look like it's interesting to you? And if you want your branches real thin, add some water. And what I'm doing is I'm turning my brush until it's in a real nice point. That's very helpful. The other thing is that it's also very helpful to have brush strokes when you paint to go down the canvas. If you push your brush up, it's a little harder to make that line that you like. So start at the top and then go down. So it's from the top and then go down. And then at some point, you're going to want to switch to your detail brush. So switch over to your detail brush and add a little water to it and make it pointy. So I'm just adding water. And I'm using my pinky to balance where I want my details to go. And now I'm actually taking my time, really adding some of these branches. So add water, stir. If you want to add just plain black to get it even darker, you're certainly welcome to just use plain black. I show you how to make your own black just because I think it's important to learn how to mix your own colors. You can take a lot of time and really add a lot of branches to this. If your tree has so many branches that you can't count them, then you have probably enough. If you're going for realism. Just getting close to where I'm kind of happy with this tree. I'm just adding these details now, these little branches. You can make some really long branches. It's also good to overlap. When one branch is over another, just gives much more realism, or I should say believability to your art. Not everybody likes realism. We have this debate in my house all the time. My husband likes realism, and I kind of like a little variety. To me, a painting doesn't have to be like a photograph to be valued. I value all kinds of art. I think it's really fun to add in all these little details. You start painting nature, then when you go out in nature, you really start paying attention to what it really looks like. Yeah, I'm liking this so far. So little branches. And now comes a lot of the thinking time. Where do I want these fine details to go? And just play around with it. You know, sometimes you don't have to put a lot of detail to make it look beautiful. Sometimes you only need a little bit. Constantly look at it, see, well, what branch seems to be missing something? You want to kind of have balance. You don't want one part of your tree to be too detailed and one part of your tree to have all the detail. So if you're happy with your tree, let it sit there for a minute. And now I'm going to find a branch that I want to put my bird on. Now you don't even have to have a bird, but I'm going to put a little crane right here. So I'm going to paint, it's kind of like a football shape. It's real small. I'll bring it
Cheryl,
closer.
someone said that their branches are not as thin. Any advice?
Absolutely. So what I'm doing with the thin one is I'm using the smallest, pointiest brush I have. And then I put water on it and I stirred it up and then I turned it. So I'm turning it into a point. And also if you add water, the thinner your paint, the easier it is to get those really small brush strokes. So I hope that helps. So I have the body of the bird. Make a little S. So little bird. And now I'm going to paint the reeds in the grass. So I'm going to go back to the larger brush at first. And for this, I am going to go from the bottom up. I'm holding it a little closer so you can see what I'm doing. And just paint random blades of grass. Some are tall, some are short. Give it some variety. And then go back to your small brush. And again, I'm adding water. So if you add water and then twirl your brush, you'll get a really fine line. It takes a little practice. And also, if you want a really fine line, just press real gently, like you're petting a kitty. So water and being real gentle is the way to get some of these reeds thin. And you notice I'm trying to make them sort of curvy, maybe like there's a gentle wind blowing. Now another thing you can do is make a little gray. So to make a little gray, take your black, stir it up, add a little dot of white, and make very dark gray. And if you want, you can add a few little brush strokes of the gray to your tree. And it just gives your tree a little bit of roundness. So it's very subtle. Just a tiny bit of gray. Just gives your tree a little more believability and a little bit of roundness. So that shows you where the light might be falling on your tree. And now it's just a matter of thinking, where do I need to add some color and shape to my art? Do I want some more branches? It's really up to you how you finish your picture. I could make some of those reeds by making some of these really fine little points. So I'm just making some little dots. And those are like the cattails in a marsh. And then real thin lines that go down. And now you have some of these cattails. So it's just a little like printmaking. You just press your brush like that into your canvas and then real thin lines going down. And then I put a little tiny brush stroke at the top for the top of the cattail. Don't forget to sign your name somewhere on your picture when you're done. I think I need a few more reeds over here, some thin ones. And I put a teeny tiny little bit of blue into the black just to get a little variety. A little bit of color here and there. So if your paint dries, try Murphy's wood soap and soak your brushes in it overnight, and that might help. And just wash your brushes real good with warm soapy water. Don't forget to get as much of the paint off as you can with a napkin or a paper towel. And I've been leaving my brushes in the water the whole time. And I hope you enjoyed painting with me today. I would like to show you what's coming up in a couple of weeks. One of my favorite artists is Vincent van Gogh. And so I painted a pumpkin patch with a Vincent van Gogh Starry, Starry Night style sky. So if you would like to learn how to paint this, that's coming up soon.